Well, yes, we're moving from politics to the economy. And as you've seen there, we've got Mr. Marcelo Keke joining us. He is an economist and also the lead consultant and CEO of Mascot Consults Limited. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program today. Well, I haven't listened to the president of the Senate saying the country has no option than to borrow to fund the budget. Is that right?
Let me put it this way. There's a background statement he made that Nigeria is a poor country. I want to start by disagreeing with him. Nigeria being poor, as he is saying, came from mismanagement of the economy. You know, for example, the thing that consumes the money that we have, which is our scarce foreign exchange earning from the sale of crude oil, so much of it goes into importation of refined, petroleum product, PMS, for example. If the refineries here are working, if the managers of this economy had been businesslike and kept the refineries running, we will be talking about importation of petroleum into this economy when we're a major oil producer. That's just one question. So he is putting it in such a way that makes it look like we're already in a corner, that the only way out is to keep borrowing. We don't have to keep borrowing, because you get to a point that even those who want to lend up to us, we no longer lend, because we have the challenge of how to service the ones we have borrowed. So it becomes an unsustainable arrangement. You have volume of debt that is gone, and you are saying more borrowing is the only option that you have. I tend not to agree with that. We have options, and the options are, if this economy is effectively diversified, you understand, then we will not have ourselves in a cul-de-sac, kind of, in a situation you have nowhere to turn to except to keep borrowing. Is that the way other economies are run? Borrowing, borrowing, and borrowing? No. And I don't think what he's saying agrees with what the Presidential Economic Advisory Council is saying, that we just keep borrowing ad infinitum. No, that is bad for this economy. Because as we speak now, it's becoming a challenge to service even the existing external debt.
So, but what about the caveat where he says that it's got to be responsible borrowing, and if they're borrowing to fund infrastructure development, and that in itself is also supposed to facilitate the revenue generation drive?
What is the meaning of responsible borrowing? We have all been in this economy for several decades, and we know the challenges that huge debt overhang constitute to this economy. You know where we are early in the from 1999 into year 2000 going forward, where we had huge debt, and the Obasanjo administration, led by Okonjo-Iweala at that time, had to do something to get debt write-off and debt forgiveness. And our external debt came down to as low as 3.3 billion. So it's always a problem when you have huge debt, because what that means is that the money you should have committed, to other developmental needs within the local economy, you commit it to servicing the debt and paying the debt. So talking about infrastructure development and all that, infrastructure development is a long-term thing. So if the government plans well, it will factor infrastructure development within its larger development plan. It will not be handled as an emergency, as he's putting it. So the only option we have is to go and borrow. Other economies don't function that way, like I'm saying. The budget, for example, is an annual plan. Where is the long-term plan of the government? Where are they looking at 5 years? Where are they looking at 10 years? You understand? So that when all that is done, how to form such development, how to form such infrastructure development becomes an integral part of such a plan or such a development plan. Not to be running helter-skelter every time, looking for short-term money to borrow, so that you go and do infrastructure. Okay? Well, they are telling all this infrastructure, that's the government speaking. How are you sure when he says responsibly, when you say responsibility, when you have a loan that will facilitate that will run for 5 years, 10 years, and all that, what do you think is going to happen going forward that those, the money that comes will be really handled responsibly as the Senate president is saying? You have the human factor in it. We all know about the level of embezzlement here, mismanagement of public funds, and so on and so forth. And before you discover how the money has, been mismanaged and all that, it becomes something that happened several years ago. And the actors may have disappeared. I have this challenge of EFCC running everywhere trying to get these people. And the so-called infrastructure you're talking about, you see how shortly they are, executed or built. They will not be built to last, and yet the money is gone.
Right. So we have moved sort of into.
I don't fly with that.
Right. So we've moved sort of into the processes of control, monitoring, and the rest. We'll explore that. But it would seem that at least you agree with the president of the Senate that we don't have the resources, at least the revenues we would like to have to develop infrastructure, fund the budget, and the rest. And the part you disagree mainly is the part where the Senate president said Nigeria is poor. That was the term he used. If you were to describe Nigeria in your own words, then what would you say about the current stage Nigeria is in now?
The current stage in which we find ourselves is largely man-made. I put into mismanagement of the economy.
Would you say Nigeria is rich? Nigeria is, well, semi-rich or semi-poor? What would you use?
It depends on what is indicator you're looking at. After all, by GDP, we are still the largest economy in Africa. So what am I talking about? And the major oil producer and exporter. What am I talking about? Okay? So what indicator is using to talk about our poverty? Unless he's talking about GDP per capita because of our population. And then a very responsible government, I'm talking about government over the years, not just this current government, would have factored in the issue of population. You understand? And not allow a situation where our population is growing at 3-point-something% and the GDP is growing at, less than 1%. You understand? That's what I'm telling you, it's man-made. So the issue of crying to the world that we are a poor country and because of that we have no option than to be borrowing from here and there. If as a poor country you keep borrowing, don't you think it gets a point that you are over-borrowed? Okay?
So,
and this issue of infrastructure, like I said, you don't just wake up one day and start talking about infrastructure. Nigeria did not start existing from today. We have been an independent country in the past 61 years or so. So why is the infrastructure issue suddenly becoming an excuse, for this massive borrowing, as he's saying? And that is the only option for us to fund infrastructure.
The context, I do understand your point. I mean, you say Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. So clearly for you, you don't see Nigeria as poor from that perspective. Well, the context he used was our resources are so low. He spoke about revenues being so low. And so back to the point about borrowing. I know this debate has been ongoing for a while, different angles to it. But with the magnitude of infrastructure deficit we have in this country, put at billions of dollars to even get to a point where we can begin to say, well, we're approaching, well, some level of, some semblance of normalcy. There's a huge gap. How can we bridge that gap without, I mean, the Minister of Transport was talking about funding for the railway, for example, saying about $1.5 billion was borrowed, an agreement was signed, and Nigeria also provided some part of that funding. So there's some that we can give, and there's some that, well, according to the government, that we actually need to borrow. So how do we bridge that huge gap of infrastructure deficit, if not borrowing?
Well, I want to stress again that our only option is not borrowing. And you're talking about, resource shortage or something like that. Nigeria is richly endowed. And that has been our unique selling point as a country over the years. We are richly endowed. Whether you are talking about, human resources, whether you are talking about solid mineral, whether you are talking about oil, whether you are talking about gas, and so on and so forth. So how come we are at this point in time just wringing our hands, talking about poverty as the excuse to keep borrowing? I really don't agree with that. Something has to be done so that these resources I've mentioned to you will be explored and exploited so that we have money to push ourselves out of poverty, the poverty trap we are talking about. You understand? So we just cannot succumb to that kind of impression and perception that we're a poor country. And so the only way to move forward is to keep borrowing. It is dangerous. It's a dangerous way to go. It's a dangerous way to go.
I think you're saying if I can understand your point, I think there are two different things which I think you're trying to point out. We're richly endowed on the one hand, but at the moment, when he says revenue is low, you say it's as a result of mismanagement. But what do you make of this World Poverty Clock when he says Nigeria currently has the largest number of poor people in sub-Saharan Africa, estimating about 105 million people are living in extreme poverty. That's as of 2020. So will this narrative kind of validate what he says by saying, look, at the moment, revenue is low, we're poor, and then you think richly endowed. So aren't they two separate things there?
Can you ask the question, how did we get to this debacle? How did we get to here as a country? You understand? To be now the country with the largest population of poor people. How did we get here? You understand? That is why we have what is called economic planning, development planning. Development planning will now include every facet of human being, every aspect of life, including taking care of the population growth we are talking about, including taking care of education, including taking care of food production, including the security situation we are talking about, including everything. You understand? So if there has been such a plan in place, or if the government is thinking, the big picture, the way I'm talking about it over the years, we will not be here. So talking about, resource endowment, such resource endowment should be turned into money. And you have money, to the extent that, talking about borrowing will be the last issue we talk about. And if you are borrowing, it will be an insignificant, portion of what you need to do the infrastructure I talk about. Let me also ask you, why do we have challenge with PPP, private-public partnership, in the infrastructure thing? Why do we have challenge? Don't you know that is what is happening in other clients? It's an option rather than borrowing everything 100%, like you are being told. But people cannot come for PPP because the government itself appears not to have been honest with people who came around for such PPP. I don't want to go into mentioning such experiences before, but some people who came in to invest here through PPP, many of them had their fingers burnt and went away. So that's why government or whoever is telling us that the only option we have is to keep borrowing. No, PPP, huge infrastructure projects are better or best handled through PPP. You understand? So Nigeria is not an island or should not be an island unto itself. The rest, we have examples, whether in West Africa or Africa or the rest of the world, how these infrastructures are done. You ask yourself, must it just be known that other countries are getting?
Well, we do know that a few roads recently were listed by the Ministry of Works, as a federal Ministry of Works. Mr. Okeke, I don't know if you can hear me. We do know that a few roads were listed recently by the Federal Ministry of Works as roads that the federal government was going to partner with the private sector on. I want to believe that is that sort of a partnership you're making reference to. However, when we look at where the large amounts of money which we have borrowed in recent times, where we have spent them, I'm going to ask you whether you are impressed as to where we have spent this money, because for a number of people, their issue is not exactly with borrowing. Their issue is where you're spending the monies you have borrowed and how you intend to pay back. So we've spent a huge number of the monies we've borrowed on rail infrastructure and a number of other infrastructure, some of them mostly doing with transport, and a number of other maybe security infrastructure as well. Are you impressed with where we've spent this monies? And are you confident that looking at where we have invested the money, we will be able to pay back?
Thank you for that question. As an economist, we usually don't look at things and come up with position in the short term per se, because over time you see things, changing. So the picture you are painting of those infrastructure projects that are completed or commissioned, let us see how things play out, over time, the next 1 year, the next 2 years, and all that, and see how they are run, so that the much expected return on investment, will materialize, and from which you now use to service the loans. Is that not what we're talking about? So let us see how those things are run, and the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years will now improve the quality of the infrastructure you are talking about that is put in place. As it is now, the whole thing may just, be flashy. You are looking at them and you say, wonderful, excellent. But by the time, over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we now see whether they are built to last, and then how they are run to realize this money you are talking about to service those loans. But our experience in this economy, I must tell you again, is that these things don't last. If they have been lasting, I don't see why they will be in this kind of crisis of borrowing so much to be doing the same project we are talking about. Does it mean we have not been having roads in Nigeria? Does it mean those roads have not been built?
Legitimate, and they're valid. I mean, they're within a context. So the question we also have asked is, before we borrowed this money, is knowing that this is where we wanted to spend them, and knowing our penchant for not being able to maintain infrastructure when we build them, shouldn't we have asked these questions before the investment was made? Why do we have to wait and see after the monies have been invested already to see how we eventually keep them?
You see, we are talking about human factor. We are talking about human factor. The quality of the infrastructure you are talking about is partly and largely a function of people who are in position at that point in time, you understand, and how they go on executing these things. Don't you know that some people in Nigeria, without you knowing, find themselves colluding, that with their creditors. It has happened in the past. Colluding with their creditors. And so a huge chunk of the money you think is borrowed, goes somewhere. I don't want to accuse any person. But we have been in this economy, like I said, in the past 60 years. Okay? If things were working out the way we are saying, just borrow, build this infrastructure, Nigeria will not be where we are today. I remember in 1991, the person that was Minister of Finance that time was Olufalaye. And my organization, we had a seminar and invited him to speak on the Nigerian debt question. So as at that time, the challenge this economy at that time was that the so-called huge external borrowing could not be accounted for. Even to trace who took what, it became so difficult. Let us believe that this is the 20th century and that people are now better at, putting these things in shape and accounting for them and so on and so forth. But still, I am a bit worried because of the human factor, when things are presented to be so beautiful at the beginning and all that. Will these things last? That's why we're talking about sustainability. Will they be sustainable? And if you're talking about borrowing and building, do you believe that at any point in time, money you have borrowed will lift us, from where we are to the level of infrastructure that we need in this economy, given who we are and the people that run and manage these things? Why will our refineries be shut down? Is it not the same?
The main question I'm posing to you is what safeguards we could have put in place, or what safeguards we can put in place, knowing our weaknesses, knowing our past experience with borrowing.
Let me tell you, what we should do is to reduce our dependence on external borrowing for our infrastructure need. And for us to do that, the resource endowment I have mentioned here should be developed within the context of a proper development plan. You understand? So when we do that over time, this economy is an integrated whole. So if you are doing well in terms of diversified economy, money will be coming from various sources. and you will not be going cap in hand, borrowing all the time. You understand? So when these things are done simultaneously, the economy will be moving. But when a part of the economy is working, like we are now talking about borrowing, and you are building road, building this, building that. You know, even when you build the road and whatever you are building, and at this level of insecurity in the land, do you think you will attract local and foreign investors? I want to leave at that question. Thank you.
All right, then, Drew, thank you very much indeed for your response today. Mr. Marcel Okeke is an economist, and also he's the, well, yeah, we did that earlier on. So thank you very much indeed for your thoughts today. So there you go, gentlemen. So quite a number of issues right there. So we'll just be back in a moment and take a look at some of the comments coming through from you. Don't go away.